Hello and welcome to the stunning Carp Society, Farriers Lake. Now this is my syndicate, has been for the last couple of years, and the sort of purpose of this video is to sort of show you two sort of areas of fishing really. So syndicate fishing, so sort of a lake that you can come back to time and time again, learn, educate yourself and sort of develop a picture of how to fish. But also, Farriers is not only famous for big commons, it's also famous for a lot of weed. Now at the moment the weed isn't as terrible as it has been in past years, but I am still fishing in and around weed. So the idea of these videos, and I say these videos because I'm going to do a couple of sessions now in sort of May, and then a couple of sessions towards the end of the hot period, if you like, sort of in September. And the idea is to show you how things change, how to adapt your fishing, but most of all, how to present your rigs and how to fish effectively in weedy situations. So the swim you find myself in is a swim that has fond memories for me. The first week of joining Trakker, I got given a day to come to a lake and sort my kit out. So I chose obviously my syndicate, got some rods out and was blessed with a 45-pound common and a new PB. So the swim I've dropped into holds fond memories. Now already I've noticed the spots have changed. So what I will do later on is show you how I found the spots. But obviously being my syndicate, I knew the rough areas. So that's sort of point one, is education. Learn and sort of gain yourself a knowledge. But I don't want to go too in depth about how I found things and what I've been doing so far, because for now I've got the rods out, I have baited them, but unfortunately already the floating weed has picked up one of the rods. So what I need to do now is quickly recast that rod, rebait it, and fingers crossed for the rest of the session. Well, that's day one drawing to an uneventful close really. I got the rods out, got the bait out, and then I have just been plagued by these floating rafts of weed. It is unfortunately part of the course. You have to learn to deal with that when you're fishing weedy waters. The unfortunate thing is the wind has changed direction about 4 times today. So what's happened, as you can imagine, the raft's drifted, wind's changed, raft has drifted back. And so it's meant I've had to cast multiple times, and that's happening again, unfortunately, I think, by the looks of things. But it is a thing that you have to deal with. It's something you have to cope with. I've tried tips up to stop the weed that's close in drifting, and then what happened is the line entered the water is picking it up further out. I tried sinking the tips, and you know, it just hasn't quite worked. So it's a perseverance thing, and that's with a lot of fishing. You've got to have the ability to go again. I would rather have recast them rods and been confident where they were fishing than just left them and guesstimated that they were going to be okay. It takes 2 minutes to put those rods back out. However, moving into the dark, there's not been a lot of action today. One of the lads further down the banks just had a tench, and that's pretty much as exciting as the day has got. However, there has been night bites. There have been early morning bites. The rods are on the spots. The bait is deployed. And you've got to sit back and be confident. You know, it's a huge thing. Confidence is crucial. It's a motto that I live by. If you're not confident, then you're going to sort of come up against yourself. You know, there's a lot of other things that are fighting against you. You've got the conditions, you've got the fish feeding, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of things that are already against you. If you put yourself against yourself, you're going to be in trouble. I'm confident in the spots. The rigs I love, the baits I love. So therefore, going into tonight, confidence is high. We will see what happens. Obviously, if anything happens through the night, we'll get the fish out on the bank. And if not, I'll see you first thing in the morning, sort of catch up on what I'm going to be doing, what I'm going to be changing potentially, and how we're going to continue with the rest of this session. Well, good afternoon, and to my right is a completely new swim. Didn't have a morning catch up because literally I woke up this morning and realised I wasn't on the fish. So after all that careful laying of traps and whatnot, if you're not on the fish, it's absolutely pointless, as everyone well aware of. So folded everything down and basically did 3/4 of a lap of the lake with the barrow to try and find a new area. So I've come into an area known as Toilet Bay or Toilet Point, pegged for on the map. And the reason I've moved up here is people in and around the area have caught in the last 24 hours. But not only that, there's 2 bays either side, you're out on a point, so you've got bay left and right, and I've seen fish in both of those bays. And from my knowledge of the venue, what happens is they drift in and out of those bays through the day, and you can pick them out in front of it here as they are moving from one bay to the other, or from the main lake into the bay, or from the bays out into the main lake. It's a good interception point. So the difference with this compared to the other end is it's almost completely barren of weed. As you can potentially see from the drone footage, there is almost a line across the lake where weed is and where weed is not. So for a weed fishing piece, it's very different in the fact that I've got spots that I already know in here, and I've plumbed them up, and essentially they're clear. So I'm now going to use bait as a feature. Now, going away from what I was using at the other end, a little bit of mixed bait with some corn and some pellet, I'm just going to fish straight boilie here. So on the bottom, big visible items with hopefully a nice visible hook bait in the middle of them. So without further ado, I'm not going to bore you with any more time wasting. I'm going to literally get these rods out, get some bait around them, and see what the session holds.
I'll make you see that it's you and me, you and me. I'll do what needs to be done until the race is won. I'll go the extra
Well, they say sometimes a rod in the right place for an hour is better than the wrong place for 24, and this could not be a better testament. 45 pounds 2 ounces of hard fighting Farriers carp, absolutely buzzing. Oh, she's gonna go. Can't keep them out too long here, so just hold her up. 45 pound 2 ounces, that's 2 sessions, 2 bites, 2 45-pound carp. Absolutely blown away. And it shows sometimes listening to the man who is behind the camera pays off. Absolutely blown away. What a carp. Well, at 30 pound ounces, this berserk common is number 2. Second spot. And yeah, it's just bananas. Take was incredible. Pulled me round into the bay to my right hand side, had to don the waders and get round the corner to land it. But yeah, plan coming together, a move and 2 fish. Absolutely blown away. And this is the effort, you know, I always say I barrowed the whole length of the lake to go on a whim really, with fish being in either bay, fish coming out of the area. To me it was a no-brainer. But yeah, 30 pound ounces, fish number 2. Absolutely buzzing. Right, slip it back. Well, good morning, and what a morning. Last night, I mean, I could not have predicted what happened. Going into the night after that move, I wouldn't say I was unconfident. I'd seen fish in the area, but I hadn't seen them boshing. They weren't fizzing. they were just sort of milling around in the two bays. But a 45 pounder and a 30 in a night from here, when it is still fishing tough, is mind-blowing. I'm dead chuffed. Unbelievably, you know, 3 seasons on here without a 40 pounder, which I was starting to get ridiculed about, and then 2 consecutive bites on 2 separate sessions, 2 45 pounders. This is the magic of Farriers. I say, as my good friend Josh Boyce told me ages ago, it's your turn soon. It's someone else's turn soon after that. And you know, it's all about consistency, and that's what I like to think I've done. I've been very, very consistent on the venue. I think I've had 7 fish over 39 pound, but not just that 40 pounder. So the 2 45s next to each other, and then not forgetting that 30 pounder. It pulled my arm off. What an absolute savage fish. But as you can see, the sun is up now. The fish have pushed back into the bays, so I potentially have missed my second opportunity. But we're going to see it out for the rest of the day, see what happens. Sort of, I've got to be off about lunchtime, so we'll see out this bite time, see what happens. If nothing else, I'm back next week, so we will see what happens for the rest of the day. Well, what a surprise. Rods have been out for an hour and 27 pound of very rare Farriers mirror. Unbelievable. To be honest with you, I found the spot, got the rods out. I'm fishing in and around a lot of weed on a known spot. And quite literally, the bait went out beautifully, the rods went out beautifully, and an hour later I've been rewarded. Tore me to bits. Down the margin, in the waders, a bit like last week. They are psyched up, hyped up, and ready to rumble, but absolutely buzzing. So I'll slip this back. I'll talk about the spots this week because they are very different to last week. What an amazing carp. Well, what a result that is. I didn't introduce, but obviously we're back down Farriers. It's the second week, and we found the fish. Now, the area I'm in is yet again a completely different area to the last 2 areas from last week. And the fishing is very much different. So because of the fact that that fish came so soon, I hadn't even set up, and then I did all the bits and pieces for that fish and got the rods back out. Today has been sort of a semi bit of a write-off, but I have got 3 days ahead of me, so 3 nights, pardon me, ahead of me. So I haven't wanted to give too much information now and fuss around. I've got the rods back out, put some more bait out, and just going to leave them settle. But then tomorrow what we'll do, we'll get up and I'll show you how I'm fishing in and around this weed. These swims along this bank are different again. There's sort of a multitude of different sorts of weed here. We've got some low lying weed, we've got some sort of plume weed in front for the line lay to be affected. So I want to get the rods back in because hopefully I want to get a chance of another fish quite quickly. So I've got the rods back out, got the bait back out, and then tomorrow what we'll do is we'll go through the spots, how I'm fishing them. I will give you a little bit of an insight. These are known areas that I'm fishing. However, they have changed due to this sort of early blossoming of weed. A week ago, hardly any weed. In 1 week, that weed has sort of come up in and around the fringed areas. So I found the spots. It did take a little bit of time to get dead on the spots, but it's obviously paid off. So tomorrow what we'll do, we'll go through how I found the spots, what I'm presenting over them, and how I'm fishing, how the bait application, all those bits and pieces. But for now, the sun behind the camera there is just about setting. I'm going to get some burgers on. I'm going to sit and watch an awesome sunset, and fingers crossed there might be a fish. Bite time has been sort of between midnight and 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. So if nothing happens by then, we'll skip the rods in, we'll show you the spots, how we're fishing in the weed, in and around the weed, how I'm baiting. But in the meantime, my fingers are crossed, toes are crossed, everything's crossed for something to go off in the night. So, fishing in and around the weed and feature finding in and around the weed. What we're going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of explanation, and then what I'll try and do is overlay some graphics of the venue, and sort of you can see how and what I mean about spots and areas. Now, as I said, Farriers has got an abundance of different types of weed, but in and amongst all that weed is some phenomenal clear spots. Some of them very, very small, some of them are quite big, some of them are long channels, and it's all about trying to work out, in my opinion, in weed, where the fish are, where they want to be, and how they're going to get there. So for me, in this swim, I know that up to my left-hand side is a very, very shallow bar, very, very shallow area. And then down the bank is a deeper area. And between those two areas are weed channels, there's silt, there's a little bit of gravel, and it's all about picking that route. Now, for me, in here, peg 8, they come quite close in, they come across the middle of the weed channels, and they go out and decide whether they go left down into the bottom corner or right into this corner here. So what I want to find on this session is an area of traffic, a moving spot. Now, I have seen fizzing, I have seen fish moving, and they are following the path I would expect them to take. So I need to get the rods on the areas and get them in the zone. So what I did yesterday was referred back to my notes, some areas and zones that I've already marked up in here before, and that I know fish do come from. I personally haven't had fish from them, but I know that fish come from them. So that was a starting point. So knowledge, if you have prior knowledge, if you have existing knowledge, if your mate has some knowledge, tap them, get that information, because that is a great sort of starting block. So what I've done is I've wrapped up, but I've actually wrapped up a rod length longer than my spots. And that means that I can go over the back of the spot and then feel into the spot. So I should get the whole spot. And that's a key thing, is I think, is knowing the whole spot, because I'm quite a spotty angler, if you like, not facially, but actually how I like to present my baits. I like to find the edge of the weed. I like to find the front or the back of the weed. I like to find the bottom of a drop off. You know, as do many anglers. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination I'm doing anything unique. But for me, I would rather find that killer spot first time with 20 casts than find it with one cast, put a rig out, and then lay on my bed chair and win an hour and about it. So in and around weed, I need as best line lay as I can and a rig presented on the spot. So the two spots I've got, as I said, are very, very different. So my left-hand spot is a gravel seam that has weed at the front, weed at the back. And what I've opted on there is I've cast right to the back of that spot, icked it out of the weed and dropped it on that spot and clipped it. I've then wound it down, feeling for the spot, and then at the front of the spot, clipped it back into the clip. And then what that's given me is the length of the spot. By casting at the back and dragging all the way to the front, when I do those wraps, I know that the back is 13 and the front is 11.5 wraps. So I know I've got a good amount of land, if you like, to present myself. So what I've done, as I do with all my sort of weed fishing, is I put a little bit of putty up the line, so that the idea being is the rig hits the back of the spot, so that when those fish come out of the weed, the rig's there. All your tackle is laying through the spot, if you like, but it's pinned down by a bit of putty at the front of the spot. A lot of people will say, oh, you want all your bits and pieces in the weed. And to me, I want a nice big flat area that those fish can't get spooked from. So the left-hand rod, overcast, drew it back, found the length of that spot, and presented through the spot. Now, my right-hand spot is presented over silkweed. Why? Because that's where the fish get. That's what the bits and pieces those fish want to eat, apart from our boilies, are in the weed. Now, when I say weed, I'm talking sort of 4 to 6 inches of sort of silky weed, but underneath is clean. When you're casting out, you're getting a solid drop on that rod, but when you put out the old grappler lead, you're getting silkweed. And I said it's 4 to 6 inches. I've measured that, looked at it, and what I've actually done is created a presentation using my helicopter that the lead can plummet in, the bead is above what I can see as the weed tops, if you like, and then my rig flats over. Now we'll go through rigs, but for me, on weed and in and around weed, critically balanced, slow sinking things work perfectly well. And I know a lot of people get fussed about, or if they come onto the spot and they kick it all around, because in my eyes, that rig is sort of inhibited by the weed in and around the spot. It's not so much of a problem. So I've got wafters on both areas. The one on the gravel has got a little bit of putty pinning it down because I don't want it to waft off that gravel. but the one on the weedy area hasn't, because as I say, I think the little fronds of weed will pin itself down onto the bottom. So that's sort of how I present and how I think about the spot. I say I could go into a long sort of explanation of exactly how to find spots, what you're feeling for the donk, but it's been done countless times. If you can get that drop, and I say I get the drop with my mark rod, but not only do I get it with my mark rod, I get it with my fishing gear before I put it out. And to me, if I can get it on a marker rod with braid and a 4-ounce lead, and then get it with a 3-ounce lead and mono on a spot, then that is a good spot to fish. So we've had a fish, we know that spot is active, there is fizzing in and around me at the moment. So I'm on edge. I don't know what to really do. The spots are good, the bait's good, the rigs are good, and the fish are here. So I think it's just going to be a little bit of a waiting game, sitting it all out. But we'll go through the rigs and the bait later on. But for me, finding those spots in and around weed and knowing what's to the left, what's to the right, what's in front, what's behind, will give you the sort of most information about how to deal with those spots. So if you're on gravel, present through potentially, and on that siltweed, just don't be scared of it. Don't be scared of fishing around weed. Obviously you don't want it to be in jungles of weed because you're just not going to get a presentation. But that low-lying stuff in and around clumps of weed is a deadly kill zone for those carp to be in. So we're going to let the morning progress, see what happens, and fingers crossed we'll catch up with you later with one of them in the hands. So as I said in the feature finding section, rigs play a huge part when you're fishing in and around weed. No more than obviously they do in any fishing situation, but it's not so much about the hookability, it's not so much about the mechanics, it's about strength, reliability. And one rig for the last sort of 18 months has done everything for me. It's the old combi slip rig. I've called it the slippery kickery rig in videos and people have chastised me for it. But essentially, it's a slip D combi rig. You know, by no means have I invented this whatsoever. It's been very well documented in the press, and I know a lot of people that use it. But for me, it's a new rig, and I had to sort of tailor it to what I wanted, and especially fishing in weedy situations, it needed to be strong. So starting off, a little short 5-inch fluoro section. For me, strong, tough, reliable, kicks away from the lead every single time, and it presents a challenge for the carp. You know, stiff materials have always been a sort of kryptonite for a carp, really. And as I say, I used the D-rig, the old fluoro D-rig, for many years, and it was only sort of 18 months ago I was thinking, am I missing out on fiddly bites because of I have no suppleness, I have no movement? Those fish have really got to suck that bait up to get it into their mouths. So I looked for, you know, I went back to a rig that I used years ago, which was the combi rig. So for me, that combination of materials, the suppleness, the sort of way that it can move, its flexibility, paired with that stiffness once it's in the fish's mouth, it's just too much for them to deal with. So fluoro link down to then a doubled over section of the inner core of our soft coated 35-pound braid. I've just found that's the perfect balance in suppleness for the rig, but also it needs that needs that little bit of stiffness to kick that hook out in that final sort of 3 to 4 millimeter section of your rig. If that's too supple, it can flop back on itself, it can tangle itself on its own rig. No good, needs to kick away. Then we've got a hook rigger, a large one in this case, and all that's designed to do is obviously make it flip and turn, but it also elongates that gape, gives that lip a little bit more presentation, and it's a little bit more oomph to get in that bottom lip. And then obviously you've got the blowback sort of slip D section, and that kicker pinches that perfectly. I've never had this slip back on me unless it's had a fish on. I've never had it after a recast or anything like that. Even dragging it through weed, that just doesn't seem to slip. So yeah, again, a rig that is strong, it's reliable. The size 6 wide gape for me have been a standout hook. Since I sort of decided to go on this rig, I knew I needed a sharp, strong hook. and the old wide gape has really stood the test for me. You know, I've had some proper hairy battles with this in the weed, in through snags, and not just on this venue, you know, all over Europe. And I now have utmost confidence in a single rig. Now, as I said, for me, I want to find that spot that I can present a rig that I know will catch me a carp, rather than trying to tailor everything to anything else. It's all about getting the right rig on the right spot, putting the bait over the top, and you'll catch carp. Now, going away from that, and you know, onto another rig that I have used quite a lot on these sessions, is the Ronnie. I'm not going to talk about it too much. I just really want to talk about the hook that I've been using, and that's the Klinger BP hook. I never saw myself coming away from a curve on the Ronnie, to be honest. It's caught me hundreds and hundreds of carp, and everything just seemed right. However, because of the way that I like to really rakish angle on the hook, I had to steam shrink tube, and I just couldn't get on with just doing it all the time. It got rid of the quick changeability of this rig and sort of made it a lot harder to use. But I was urged to try the Klinger BPs because they've got that inherent angle inbuilt, because of the way that it's sort of like a solid curve all the way around, from eye all the way around to tip, and it's been deadly. I haven't used it on here particularly on the last couple of sessions, but leading up to these I did give them a go, and yeah, the hook hole's been great. And I think if you're going to use a Ronnie, a confidence rig, a sort of get it above that silkweed, that there is a deadly, deadly rig, and that hook, super strong, super sharp, as all the hooks in the range are. But yeah, for me, rigs are, you know, they are the be all and end all. You know, these fish will eat a bit of plastic corn, they'll eat the highest attract hook bait, but what they won't do is get nabbed on a terrible rig. So I think balance is the sort of key word for me. Everything's got to work in unison and in harmony, but strength, reliability, especially in these weedy venues, is crucial. You can't have flimsy kit, you can't have flimsy gear. So do I step anything up? Absolutely not, because I know that the gear I'm using is reliable, it is strong, it is functional, and it stood the test. As I say, you've seen a couple of good fish, you know, and some of the battles they've been hairy, they've been through weed, they've been through the snags in the margins, and I've had the utmost confidence in my kit, and that is what it comes down to. Confidence in your product, confidence in what you're using, and you know, everything else comes along in spades. Well, a bit of an impromptu end to the video. The fish have started spawning. It's always a risk fishing this time of year, and to be honest, it might well explain the lack of bites. There's only a small couple of groups going on the bars and out in the shallow areas. However, skip the rods in and away we must go. But yeah, been a great couple of sessions really. I'm extremely happy with either going with 20, a 30 and a 40 at any time of year in a couple of weeks isn't bad going whatsoever. But hopefully you've learned a little bit about weed fishing and syndicate fishing. I say I've not gone too much in depth because there's a lot more that can be focused on it in another video. But yeah, a great couple of sessions, loads of fun. And I've learned a little bit more about this. This is the one thing that I've tried to take from sessions, is never give up learning. 8 was a new swim for me. To have a fish from there, fantastic. An old haunt in peg 4. But yeah, I've learned a lot about the movements of the carp in and around this sort of pre-spawning time, where I haven't spent a lot of time necessarily fishing for them in that time in the last couple of years. But yeah, rod's packed up now, packed that bivvy down, and we'll get on the road and catch you on another adventure very shortly.